Welcome back to the most professional Starcraft 2 with a new set of Starcraft 2 public test realm patch notes. Words I wasn't sure I was ever going to say again, and now I'm not entirely sure that I wanted to. But Blizzard has returned from hibernation and given us this public test realm patch, which is not in the game yet, but historically many of the changes on the public test realm have made it to live. So, out of nowhere, let's see what we got. Like and subscribe and all that. There's not too much to look at, but it's a lot. Zerg. The Spire cost has been reduced from 250-200 to 150-100. What first strikes me is the fact that the Spire costs 200-200. So, this is a buff, but it concerns me that the original numbers are incorrect. Big buff. Centrifugal hooks, Baneling speed now give plus 5 HP to Banelings again. Microbial Shroud now reduces ranged attacks by 50% damage. Make StarCraft 2 Brood War again. Halfway to Dark Swarm. That is a complete change from the current usage, which is 50% reduced damage from air units against ground. So the niche uses against like carriers and battle cruisers, not against spells, and it no longer persists for a few seconds after the unit has left the shroud, which was a buff in the previous patch that nobody used anyways. So that's madness, but we're not done. Energy overcharge, or any energy overcharge grant. Giant grant games? Don't think so. Anyways, the energy overcharge has been reduced from 100 to 50 energy, but the cooldown reduced from 60 to 45. So you can no longer slap 100 extra energy, just 50. Still very useful, but definitely a nerf, even with the cooldown reduction. Mothership HP reduced to 300-300. Psionic Storm duration changed from 2.86 to 8.58. So like 3 times as much, I think is what that comes out. And damage reduced from 10 to 5 per tick. So I think this changes it from 80 to 120 total damage. So make StarCraft 2 Brood War again. That is the theme so far. Wild. Anyways, Dark Templar Blink attack delay reduced from 0.75 to 0.25. Not sure why we're keeping it in at all, but okay. And surveillance mode now reveals observers, though it increases vision even more. Which, okay. Kind of an odd nerf. Across the board, I would say these are nerfs, but Psi Storm lasting 3 times as long, which you should consult your doctor if it's much longer than that, but wild again. And we're not done. Siege tanks can no longer be abducted in siege mode. Viking cost reduction from 150.75 to 125.50. Drilling Claw's effectiveness increased, Widowmines, and hyperspeed. It's not hyperspeed, it's hyperflight. Again, who wrote this? Research time decreased to 79 seconds. I mean, it's a speed upgrade, but still. And then we finally fixed the Cyclone bug. Orbital commands not auto-rallying. Cyclone attack upgrade giving +1 instead of +2. Because anybody cares about that. An issue with Mothership attack at max range. Alright, bug fixes. Okay, first things first. Where did this come from? There's been plenty of deliberation and discussion, as I'm sure you know. This is, as it stands, despite a relatively short amount of notes, the largest change to StarCraft 2 across the board since probably Legacy of the Void. I guess if you take them in total, the changes with like the removal of the Mothership core and all the Cyclone reworks, that has been probably more overall. But this is by far, in my opinion, the largest single set of changes potentially to StarCraft 2. And here's the thing, I don't even hate them. I am very concerned that it's clearly that either someone who didn't know all the stats or knew how to proofread them is writing them. I'm just going to gloss right over that because I'm actually very interested in all this, and it's super broken, and I'm not sure who gets the worst end. It's probably Protoss, but... So siege tanks no longer abducted in siege mode. Wild. But counteracted by Microbial Shroud reducing... This is a complete So, Marines, Stalkers, Tempest, Carriers, Siege Tanks. I assume it will work for splash damage. Microbial Shroud, which lasts, I believe, 11 seconds. So, Dark Swarm is back. It's not as powerful, but that's mad. That's crazy. That is a real... And Storm doing way less DPS, but lasting longer. I think that's a buff. It's a nerf against the very best players, like Clem and Serral, who are going to be able to micro out of it, but it's also, you're denying an entire area. So this will make Banelings and Zerglings way better. Thing is, Banelings and Zerglings are already good. I'm looking to see, like, what can they do against early game Zerg? So that's always been the problem with Protoss, is struggling to deal with early aggression. Everyone, well, most people at the higher level struggle with later game Protoss. Storms absolutely everywhere, warping in dozens of units. All right, not cannon rushes, not early charge let all ins, though they're still dangerous. That is not an issue for Clem or Serral. That's an issue for Johnny Diamond and Billy Bronze. Okay, but these are massive nerfs to Protoss in the early mid-game. The surveillance mode from observers, now turning them into fancy robot overlords. Odd. Like, what Terran got in here and wrote these? But I'm surprised we don't have overlords also being detectors here. This is crazy. The Vikings with a massive cost reduction. That is... And Vikings are not bad on the ground, especially against Protoss. Like, Siege Tanks no longer being abductable, but that, like, that's only Terran versus Zerg. I have no idea. So between the odd, slight, like, I hope typos, where did this come from? And I don't hate it. I think it's broken. But I think at this point, the way... I'm going to go into a meta discussion now. I'm not going to talk about the balance implications. The very simple version, as someone whose bias is showing good games to the fans. My biscuit is buttered by people watching professional StarCraft 2. All right? And there is just less and less interest in that because the same game is being played out over and over again. Either it's Serral against Protoss or someone doing a crazy all-in to try to stop them from getting the death ball. Either Clem is able to take on the Protoss or he's switching to it. Like, the matchups are so stale, the maps are so homogenous, that right now it really feels that the audience is continually being whittled down to less and less until who is the game for anymore? Now, is doing this madness going to solve that? I have no idea. And honestly, this came out of... I am still reeling. I saw this 15 minutes before you're seeing... Well, less than 15 minutes before this was recorded. I had a few false starts. I had to restart the recording because I just kept... Yeah. What the fuck? This is wild. Okay. Now... Spire costs make mutas great again. Alright, bring back the mutas. Will that change it? It'll make early Spire timing slightly better. But Vikings being cheaper. Vikings are not great against mutas, but in small numbers. Definitely not terrible. Honestly, Siege Tanks no longer being abducted. I would take Siege Tanks as a Zerg player, from the Zerg side of things. I would take 50% less damage by ranged attacks over not being able to abduct. You can still blind them with Vipers. Like, this is crazy. This is crazy. This is breaking the game. I'm here for it. I will say that Zerg, actually playing Zerg, there is a reason why the overwhelming majority of tournaments in current year outside of the most professional ones, are like 50 to 70% Protoss. And it's because below the Serral level, it's just not very fun or consistent to play Zerg. It doesn't feel like Zerg anymore. Because you can't, like, you have to nickel and dime. You have Infestors and Broodlords, and this is not going to stop that from happening, by the way. In fact, it might exacerbate it. But that mid-game tech is almost skipped over in order to rush to a hive. And units like Mutas and just Ling Bane in general are forced into this narrow window of timing because they're just not good enough to compete in the later game. Partly because we nerfed the Baneling. Okay, I keep bouncing around because I keep coming back to this is Psi Storm duration, but also damage per tick. So part of the reason Psi Storm is so devastating is when you first get, whenever you leave the storm, you take a tick of damage. So that's why it can feel so bad. Even if you dodge, you're going to take 2 ticks of damage, which before meant you would take 20 damage minimum. So even if you dodge the split second you see the storm, 20 damage. That was 2/3 of a Baneling. And a big chunk of Marines, especially if they're already stimmed. So this means the minimum damage you take from storm, if you get hit, will be 10, which is less. That is a big nerf, but the sheer time, it just turns into force field is already useless against Terran. Okay. Well, this is the first video on this. I just wanted to get this out there. I assume every other content creator has some other clickbait, accurate, but clickbait title about it. I'm gonna play it. It's on the PTR. You can actually play it. Usually what happens is a half dozen pros will actually try, and everybody else just yells at each other. Despite, it's very concerning how we're not even bothering with the explanations. There's some typos in here. I'm not entirely confident the implementation of all of this stuff will work perfectly. This is a lot of big changes, but I don't hate it. Okay, generally, well, this is Zerg bias. It feels terrible to play Zerg right now, as a human, aka not Serral. So this is a massive buff to Zerg, a big nerf to Protoss overall, and just, I have no idea. This is mech against Protoss? Is that where we're going? Because with Vikings costing like barely, Vikings cost the same as a Stalker now. And they beat Stalkers on the ground, 1v1. Huh. That's crazy. Hyperflight. Maybe it's hyperspeed. Am I dumb? I'm checking. Yeah, it's hyperflight. Okay, so that's a bit concerning then. Anyways, this one, that makes them super duper fast. Uh-huh. Okay, well, debate away. We're gonna have more info eventually. Wow.